The humiliation was supposed to be over. The comeback was supposed to be carefully planned. The cameras were supposed to roll. The headlines were supposed to celebrate a royal reunion. But instead, whispers started spreading through Britain like wildfire. And suddenly, Harry and Meghan found themselves facing the one thing they never expected: a cold, unmistakable message from the country they once called home. Not this time. Everything began with what insiders were calling the Sussex return strategy. For months, rumors had swirled that Harry and Meghan were preparing a carefully choreographed re-entry into the British spotlight. Not a full return, not an official royal comeback, something far more strategic. Something designed to remind the world that despite California, despite Hollywood, despite every interview, documentary, podcast, and memoir, their connection to the monarchy remained their most valuable asset. And according to the whispers floating around palace corridors, the centerpiece of that strategy was not Harry. It was not Meghan. It was Archie and Lilibet.
This just got a little bit twisted and even more sick. The real reason that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are bringing their children Archie and Lily to the United Kingdom next month is not because they want to have some lovely meeting with King Charles, who they have deprived from his brethren for all this time. It is rather as a PR stunt to unveil their faces to the entire world and start bringing in the moolah.
I believe it's an act of desperation. Meghan is impervious to shame.
I do think that she risks being booed if she puts herself out there too much in the UK. And if it weren't unprofessional, I might be one of the ones in the crowd going, ah!
For years, those children had been protected like state secrets. Every photograph seemed calculated down to the millimeter. A shoulder here, a silhouette there, a blurry profile, a carefully hidden face. The mystery itself became part of the brand. The children became the one royal story nobody could fully access. And then suddenly, almost overnight, speculation exploded that the family could appear together on British soil. At first, some people thought the reaction would be warm. After all, children are children. Surely Britain would welcome them, but something unexpected happened. The mood felt different. The public conversation was not about excitement. It was about questions. Lots of questions. Questions that nobody seemed able to answer. Why now? Why after years of distance? Why after years of criticism directed at the institution? Why after years of insisting Britain was no longer safe enough for the family? And most importantly, why did this feel less like a family visit and more like a publicity operation?
It's all one big game, and I watch people fall for it every time. I will eat my shoe if those children appear at the Invictus Games event alongside Harry. Honestly, I do not believe.
The more people asked those questions, the worse things seemed to become, because suddenly every detail was being examined. Every statement, every appearance, every previous interview. And the deeper people looked, the more uncomfortable the situation became. The whispers became louder. Some commentators began suggesting that Britain was suffering from royal fatigue when it came to Harry and Meghan. Others claimed the public simply no longer trusted the motives behind anything the couple did. And then came the rumor that truly sent shockwaves through royal watchers. According to palace gossip, several behind-the-scenes proposals connected to the family's public appearances were reportedly receiving far less enthusiasm than expected. Nothing dramatic, nothing official, no public rejection, just a growing sense that doors which once opened automatically were no longer swinging open quite so easily. That was when the phrase started appearing everywhere. Not this time. Not this time for special treatment. Not this time for sympathy. Not this time for another dramatic royal chapter. And suddenly, the comeback narrative began collapsing under its own weight.
The occasion is significant because it's the countdown to Invictus. Now, the countdown to Invictus is a trivial occurrence. I mean, it's something Harry could have jumped on a Zoom and said, okay, folks, a year to go, good luck. Let's go for it. Why are they all coming for what is a nothing burger? A clear message that the Sussexes want to be back in the royal fold, part of the family, and also some kind of public-facing royal role as well.
What made the situation even worse was timing. Timing has always been everything in royal stories, and this timing could not have been more awkward. While senior royals continued carrying out duties, attending engagements, and maintaining public visibility, Harry and Meghan once again found themselves fighting questions about relevance. Because relevance is a brutal thing. Once you have it, everyone wants you. Once you lose it, everyone notices. And according to the gossip circulating among royal commentators, that reality was becoming impossible to ignore. The California dream was supposed to create independence, freedom, a billion-dollar brand, a global empire. Instead, critics claim the couple kept finding themselves pulled back toward the very institution they once insisted they needed to escape, and Britain was noticing. More importantly, Britain was remembering. People remembered the interviews. People remembered the accusations. People remembered the documentaries. People remembered the memoir. Those memories had not disappeared. They had simply been waiting, and now they were resurfacing all at once.
This is just purely my opinion. I do not believe for a second that Meghan is going to allow those children to be casually walking around on camera. I do not believe that we will see Archie and Lily walking around with mummy and daddy at the Invictus event in a couple of weeks like we see the Wales children with their family, because that would mean Meghan would have to give up control of their images. There is no way that Meghan is going to stop playing the social media games that she does with those two children, and she would have to do that if they're suddenly on camera for the world to see.
What terrified Sussex supporters most was not anger. Anger can be managed. Anger creates headlines. Anger creates engagement. The real danger was indifference, and according to some observers, indifference was beginning to spread. That is the nightmare scenario for any public figure. Not criticism, not controversy, being ignored. Because once people stop caring, rebuilding influence becomes nearly impossible. Meanwhile, rumors continued swirling about potential appearances, possible family meetings, and secret negotiations happening behind palace walls. Some stories claimed doors were opening. Others claimed doors were closing. Some claimed reconciliation was near. Others claimed relationships remained frozen solid. Nobody seemed to know the truth. But one thing was becoming increasingly obvious. The grand comeback that many expected was not unfolding the way Harry and Meghan had hoped. Instead of triumphant headlines, they were facing skepticism. Instead of celebration, they were facing scrutiny. Instead of applause, they were hearing questions. And questions are dangerous because questions force people to look closer. Questions expose contradictions. Questions keep stories alive. The deeper this story went, the stranger it became, because what looked at first like a simple family visit was now turning into something much bigger, something far more uncomfortable for Harry and Meghan than they ever anticipated. The problem was no longer whether Britain would welcome them. The problem was that Britain appeared to be asking a question they never wanted asked in the first place. What exactly are they coming back for? That question hung over every rumor, every leaked detail, every supposed plan. And the more people asked it, the more the entire narrative started falling apart. Think about it. For years, Britain was described as the place they had escaped, the place that allegedly caused pain, frustration, and disappointment, the place they repeatedly suggested they needed distance from. Yet now, somehow, all roads seem to lead back to Britain, back to the royal connection, back to the very institution they once insisted they were leaving behind. That contradiction was impossible to ignore, and according to the whispers making their way through royal circles, even some former supporters were beginning to notice it. The atmosphere had shifted. The sympathy that once fueled headlines was no longer guaranteed. The curiosity that once worked in their favor was becoming skepticism. And skepticism is a dangerous thing because once people start doubting motives, every move becomes suspicious. Suddenly, even the possibility of a family appearance became controversial. People were no longer asking what Harry and Meghan would do. They were asking why. Why now? Why together? Why Britain? Why after all this time? And perhaps most damaging of all, why did this feel like a strategy instead of a reunion? That was the question nobody could escape. The whispers became louder when stories began circulating that several anticipated meetings behind palace walls were far less certain than early reports suggested. The image being painted publicly was one of warming relations and healing wounds. But behind the scenes, according to gossip swirling around royal commentators, the reality appeared much colder. Some claimed key figures remained deeply resistant. Others claimed old wounds were simply too deep. And then came the rumor that sent royal watchers into absolute overdrive. The suggestion that Britain had not rejected Harry and Meghan directly. Instead, Britain had rejected the performance, rejected the spectacle, rejected the attempt to rewrite the story, because there is a huge difference between forgiveness and forgetfulness. People may forgive, but they do not always forget. And Britain, according to the growing mood, had not forgotten a thing. Not the interviews, not the accusations, not the explosive claims, not the family drama that dominated headlines for years. Those memories were still sitting there beneath the surface, waiting for the moment somebody tried to pretend they never happened. That moment, according to critics, had finally arrived. survive, and it was backfiring. The most painful part for Harry and Meghan was that nobody needed to attack them. Nobody needed to organize against them. Nobody needed to launch some dramatic campaign. All Britain had to do was shrug. That was the humiliation, because public indifference is infinitely more dangerous than public outrage. Outrage creates attention. Indifference destroys relevance. And some royal observers were beginning to wonder if that was exactly what was happening. The headlines still existed, the discussions still existed, but the emotional investment seemed weaker. The excitement seemed lower. The willingness to believe every new chapter seemed diminished. For a couple whose entire public identity had become tied to controlling the narrative, losing control of the audience was a nightmare scenario. And then there was another uncomfortable truth floating through royal gossip circles. What if Britain no longer viewed Harry and Meghan as the future of the royal story? What if they had become a side story? That possibility terrified supporters because it changed everything. A side story cannot dictate the agenda. A side story cannot command unlimited attention. A side story cannot force the palace to revolve around it. Meanwhile, the working royals kept moving forward. Events continued. Engagements continued. Public appearances continued. The institution kept functioning. The machine kept moving. And that may have been the most brutal reality of all. The monarchy survived. The palace survived. The family survived. Life went on, which meant the dramatic return many expected suddenly looked less like a triumphant comeback and more like an attempt to reclaim lost ground. By the end of it all, the message emerging from the gossip world was surprisingly simple. Britain had not necessarily closed every door. Britain had not declared war. Britain had not officially rejected anyone. But the country had delivered something perhaps even more damaging: a collective hesitation, a pause, a refusal to instantly embrace the latest chapter without questions. And that hesitation felt like a humiliation because it exposed the one thing Harry and Meghan desperately needed but could no longer guarantee: public enthusiasm. That was the real story. Not the visit, not the rumors, not the speculation. The real story was that, for the first time in a long time, the audience seemed to be deciding the terms of the conversation instead of Harry and Meghan. And if that trend continues, the next chapter could become far more difficult than anything they have faced so far. Because when Britain starts saying, "not this time," the real question becomes what happens when it eventually starts saying something even worse: nothing at all.